G'day poker people, welcome back. Since I was living in Sarasota at the time, I thought I should at least try out the One-Eyed Jack's poker room in Sarasota, see what the action's like there, see what's going on. So that's exactly what I did. On a Sunday afternoon, I hopped in my new whip and headed over to the card room. Got there at about 4:30 p.m. and I looked at the list and there were 4 1-2 tables, 3 1-3 tables, and only an interest list for 2-5, which honestly did leave me feeling a little bit disappointed. I suppose I've been so spoiled by the Hard Rock, which has 2-5 games running at 24/7. There was a bit of a letdown by comparison, but nonetheless, I put my name on the list for all 3 of the games, and after about a 10-minute wait, I finally got seating in a 1-2 game, where I lost $20 after about 40 minutes of playing it and VPing literally 0 times. So that wasn't great, but then I do finally get called for the 2-5 game. There's a brand new game that they're starting up. I'm buying in for 1,000, ready to play some poker. Let's get in the action. So first interesting hand from the 2-5 session, we get an open limp from the hijack and cutoff, and then I'm on the button with ace-9 offsuit. I ISO raise it up to 35, which is definitely a larger sizing for an ISO raise with a pretty medium strength hand, but we're here to give action. We're new to the game. I make a 35, and then the hijack folds, but the cutoff calls. So we go heads up to a flop of 6-4-4 rainbow. When the villain checks it over to me, I could go either way between c-betting and checking here and taking the free card. I decided to check in this instance, but I don't really mind either play in this spot. I checked it here and we get that free turn card, and I'm glad we do because it's the ace of diamonds. Let's go. We make top pair. The villain checks it over to me, and I think this is a good spot to go ahead and bet. We can get called by backdoor diamond draws. There's a few different gut shots that were there on the flop anyway, which I think are probably going to call. Plus, if my opponent wants to hero call with a single pair hand, we want to give them the opportunity to do so. Sizing it down a bit though, just to get value from those hands, I make it 25, and then the villain does throw in the call. So it heads up to the river, which is the 5 of clubs. Definitely not the best river in the world. Does put in some of those gut shot straight draws. So when the villain checks it over to me, it's pretty thin to bet for value here. See, it feels pretty nitty to check back this hand, but I do think it's going to be hard to get called by worse. Plus, I do give the opponent at least some credit for probably the ace-10 offsuit and ace-jack offsuit combinations. I'm new to Sarasota, so I don't know if people play hands like ace-king and ace-queen super passive, but I've definitely seen it before in my experience playing poker, so it wouldn't totally shock me. But with that in mind, if they are limp calling those hands, maybe they're limp calling ace-8 or some of the really weak ace-wheel options, which we could potentially get value from. So maybe it isn't too thin. If I was to go ahead and bet here, I think I should bet half pot or less just to give those hands a price to hero call. But definitely think playing it cautious is the right play here. It's not what I did in game. I don't know what's going on with me. Apparently I'm already on tilt very early in this session or something, because I decided to use a larger size. I went ahead and bet 80, which I think is way too thin to use this large size of a bet. I would definitely prefer it if I had ace queen or ace king, but I think we might be running into some kicker issues versus a lot of villains calling range in this spot. So yeah, really dislike this play. No excuses though. I just made a bad play here. I went ahead and bet 80, and then the villain does call. So some chance we're good against the worst ace-x combination. I show my ace-9, and then villain does show ace-10. So there you go. Probably costing myself more money than I needed to with such a large bet. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Next hand up, it's still a bit of a limp fest because the cutoff and button open limp yet again. Then the action's on my small blind with 5-4 of hearts here. And I think it's a pretty interesting spot here already with what to do with this hand. If I thought that both of the limpers were going to limp fold a lot, I would absolutely love trying to ISO raise with this hand, try and take the pot down pre-flop, because it does have at least some equity when called. Having said that, if you do expect them to limp call pretty often, don't really like doing that with a hand this week out of position. For the same reasons I don't really like over limping either with this hand. That's a play I did though. I over limped with this hand. I think out of all 3 options, that's probably my least favorite looking back at it, but I guess I was on tilt or something because I made a bad play here, or I over limped, and then I get punished for it because the big blind decides to raise it up to 20, and then both the cutoff and button call. So now the action's back on me, and I think in this spot I just have to call here, closing the action. Really not a great spot playing this hand out of position multi-way, but we're getting a price to call and see a flop now. So that's what I do. I throw in the call, and then we do go 4 ways to a flop of 10-5-4 with 2 spades. Well, I'm glad I played this hand now when we flop 2 pair. Let's go. I check it over to the pre-flop aggressor. It does check, but then the cutoff goes ahead and bets 55. Button gets out of the way, and I think out of position when we flop 2 pair here, it's an absolute no-brainer check raise spot, particularly when the board's this wet. So I go ahead and make it 160. The big blind folds, and then the cutoff calls. So let's go. We love getting action here. The turn is the 8 of diamonds. Seems like a pretty safe turn card. Still want to bet to get value from flush draws, or if my opponent wants to get sticky with the 10x combination. So I go ahead and make it 175, and then the villain folds. So happy to rake in a pretty big pot here, even if maybe I shouldn't have been involved in the first place. Before we get into the next hand, I just wanted to take this opportunity to invite all of you to join the Anti-Gambling Gambling Club. Head over to leebets.com. We have a bunch of different anti-gambling gambling club t-shirts, hats, and hoodies in all different types of sizes and colors. So head over to leebets.com and join the club. But for now, let's get back into the gambling. Next hand up, the limp fest continues because there's 4 open limps before the action's on my big blind with pocket 7s. And I think this is another interesting spot, whether we want to just take the free flop or try and raise it up. I think if we have pocket 8s, that's a pretty clear no-brainer spot to raise. If we have pocket 6s, I think that's a pretty clear just check and see a flop hand. So 7s is right on the borderline. In this instance, I did decide to check, but I think if I had this decision back, raising might be slightly better. Whatever the case though, I check it and we go 5 ways to a flop of 4-4 deuce with 2 spades. So somehow we have an overpair with pocket 7s, and when the small blind checks it over to me, in general, I don't like betting into 4 different people, particularly when I'm out of position. But I think with this hand in particular, it's an absolute no-brainer spot to go ahead and bet. We can still get called by some worse hands like flush draws and weaker pairs. But even if the villains do fold, we're actually pretty happy to just take the pot down now, since there's going to be very, very few good turn cards for this hand, particularly with 4 different ranges in the pot. So I just decide to thin things out a bit with a bet. I go ahead and bet 25, and then only the button calls. So we go heads up to a turn, which is the 7 of diamonds. So yeah, that's actually going to be one of the turn cards that is really good for us. So now that we have the full house, I am loving life here, because I actually think the button's going to have a lot of hands that are 4x or flush draws in their range. So I do want to go ahead and bet to get called by those hands, but we can't go too big here just because I really don't want to price out a flush draw that will call a smaller bet. So I decide to bet 30 here, and then villain throws in the call. So we're loving getting action with our full house. And then the river is the ace of diamonds. And oh my God, I bloody love this river, because I think a lot of the button's flush draws that called in the turn are going to be ace high flush draws, and still very likely that they do have a lot of 4x combinations as well. So I think we have an absolute license to go ahead and nuclear bomb this river. So I do it, I go ahead and rip it all in for 140, a slight overbet of the pot, and then the villain throws in the call. We're loving that news. I show him the full house, and then the villain goes ahead and mucks. So we don't know exactly what they had. You got to feel it's either an ace or a 4x combination, and we're stacking them and raking in this pot. Let's go. Shortly after that hand, Brennan got off work and came by to say hi, since we were in Sarasota, and then we both ended up ditching pretty soon after that. So they were the interesting hands I played on the Sunday. Fortunately though, I found some time the following Wednesday to go back and check out One-Eyed Jacks yet again. I get there at about 6 p.m. and surprisingly, the room was actually a lot busier than it was on the Sunday. I get seated in a 1-2 game straight away as soon as I get there, whilst I'm on the wait list for the 2-5, which is where I play this first interesting hand. Let's get into it. We've got yet another limp fest. There's 3 open limps before the action's on my big blind with Queen 5 offsuit. No-brainer spot to check and take a flop. A free flop, in my opinion. So that's what I do, and we get that free flop, which is Queen 10-6 rainbow. So the small blind checks it over to me. I think a bet might be in order here. Definitely a lot of worse hands we can get called by in this spot. I checked it in game though, which I think is a bit of a mistake. Regardless, that's what I did. I checked it, and then the under the gun player goes ahead and bets 10. Everyone else folds, the action's back on me, and I think with a hand of strong pair, we have to call here, which is what I do. We are heads up to a turn, which is the 8 of clubs, putting out backdoor clubs. I check it over to the villain, then they go ahead and bet 15, and I'm really not liking this spot. Even though we do have a strong hand with top pair, I give my opponent credit for a lot of stronger hands. Not only did Jack 9 get there, so did 9-7, but I think it's actually pretty likely my opponent does have a strong queen. A lot of players like to open limp, particularly under the gun, like the ace queen, the king jack, so I'll give them credit for all those. Plus, if they did trap pre-flop with aces or kings, I wouldn't be totally shocked either. So I do give them credit for a lot of stronger hands. So honestly, I think the best play here probably is just to go ahead and fold my queen. Having said that though, I didn't quite have the discipline to do that in game, and this is 100% a mental leak, and I'll own up to it here now. When I am playing a lower stakes game like 1-2 or 1-3, I just don't want to fold hands for 15, you know what I mean? It's definitely 100% a mental leak, and I should just be an objective poker player and take the situation for what it is relative to the stakes in the game I'm playing if I want to be good. But yeah, I didn't want to fold top pair for 15, 100% a discipline issue and a mental leak. I'll own up to it 100%, but probably wouldn't have had an interesting hand for you guys if I did fold just here. I do throw in the call, so we get to see a river. And I'm glad we did, because it's a 5 of diamonds, baby. Let's go. We do make 2 pair, and now we suck out on my opponent's strong queens and over pairs. I go ahead and check it over to them, looking to mix in that check raise. They do go ahead and bet 20. Now we're boofing it up. We're trying to get some money in this pot. I check raise it to 80, and then the villain throws in the call. We're loving that news, particularly when we don't get 3-bet, by the way. I show my 2 pair, and then villain's hand goes in the muck. So undisciplined play, getting rewarded on the river here. You hate to see it, but I love to see it. Let's go. So sitting at the 1-2, I was talking with some of the other players in the game, and a bunch of them were really excited for this $100 Rake-free tournament that they were running at 7 p.m. Now, I made a video back in 2021 about how I hated tournaments and I wanted to quit them forever, but I think a Rake-free one might be the only thing that can suck me back into these bad boys. So at 7 p.m, instead of taking my 2-5 seed, I actually decided to throw a Rake-free bullet in this thing. Let's hope we can run it up in this tournament. Let's get into that action. The level was 100-200 with a 200 big blind ante. I still have my starting stack of 20,000 chips, and then a tight aggressive under the gun player opens it up to 600, and then a passive player in the hijack rips it all in for 6k. The action folds to my button, and I look down at ace king offsuit. So I think it's a pretty interesting spot here actually, because theoretically we're against 2 pretty strong ranges and a play that shoved over and under gun open. So if there was a spot to fold ace king offsuit, this might be it. Having said that though, it would be very tight. My experience in tournaments tells me that he might just be shoving it in very light in this instance, and we definitely don't want to be folding a hand as strong as ace king here. The only issue is we kind of have to just rip it all in for 100 big blinds here, which is going to be an absolute disaster if we do get called by the under the gun player. But sometimes you got to risk it for the biscuit. So I go all in for 20,000. And then the under the gun player tanks for a few seconds before throwing in the call. So we're not totally in love that they did throw in the call here, but fortunately it's a tournament and we're going to get to see everyone's hand before the board runs out. The hijack shows queen jack offsuit, and the under the gun player shows ace king of spades. So okay, we're very relieved to see that hand. Still have to fade a spade draw on the run out, and the flop comes out ace 10-6 with absolutely no spades. So this is beautiful. We are definitely not going to get stacked here. Just need to fade the king so that the hijack player does not win the main pot. And the turn is the 6 of spades, so clean turn, and the river 10 of clubs. So let's go. We do end up chopping the main pot with the under the gun villain, and we do win half of the hijack stack. So pretty hot start to the tournament. Let's go. So after the first 3 levels, which was 45 minutes into the tournament, we had a 10-minute break, and then the registration was already closed. So we already knew that we had to beat 155 people to win a first place prize of 4,212. Definitely not bad for a $100 tournament. Predictably though, the levels of this Rake-free tournament were going very, very fast, almost like the tournament didn't want it to be running that long. And after about an hour of being card dead, I was left with less than 10 big blinds, which is when I played this hand. So levels were 600, 1200 with a 1200 ante. And then the action falls to my hijack, and I have king jack of spades. I only have 11k in my stack, so I definitely think I just have to go all in here. Either double me up, take me home, or stealing the blinds. I really wouldn't mind any of the options at this point. Can't be chipping down any further. It's already gotten pretty bad. So I rip it all in, and then the action folds to a big blind who have been very active at the table. He sort of peels his cards pretty slowly. He gives me a kind of sigh smile, and then mucks his hand. So not sure what that was about, but happy to take down the blinds and survive a little bit longer in this tournament. Next hand, we're still at the 600, 1200, 1200 level, and then it's another limp fest at the one-eyed jacks because under the gun and +1 open limp. The action's on my hijack with ace queen offsuit. I have about 13k in my stack at this spot, and I think with the people already limping into the pot, this is a pretty no-brainer spot to just rip it all in, try and pick up the dead money, or get it all in with a pretty strong hand here. So that's what I do. I rip it all in for 13k, then the action folds to a pretty passive button who peels his cards and then goes, oh god. Sort of lets out a bit of a groan. Not really sure what that meant, but after a few seconds of tanking, he does throw his chips in the middle, so he does call my all in, and then the blinds and the limpers get out of the way. So we're going to get to see what all that commotion was about. I show my ace queen, and then the villain shows pocket fives. It's definitely a loose call from the villain there, but we'll take the action. We just have to win a flip here, and the flop is Jack 10-9 with 2 hearts. So there you go. Not a bad flop for us at all. We do have the open-ended straight draw as well as the backdoor flush draw, and we have fantastic equity against pocket fives here. I'm hoping we get there on the turn. The turn is the 10 of hearts. So if we weren't going to get there on the turn, this is about the best turn card I could hope for. Not only do we have the nut flush draw, but now we have a bunch of outs to counterfeit my opponent's pair. We are in a great spot going to the river. We are going to still need to get there though. We're just hoping to fade the brick, and the river is not a brick. It's a 5 of clubs. Oh, okay, so it's not a brick, but it just gives our opponent a full house to knock us out of the tournament. GG the villain there. We are out in 84th play for a big goose egg of $0. GG. So after I busted the tournament, I was a little bit tilted, particularly when I looked at the 2-5 list and I realized 4 people were already ahead of me on that list. And with only 1 table running, that's kind of like the nut low number of people on the list, because it could potentially be an hours long wait for you to get a seat at that 1 table with so many people ahead of you on the list. But it's also not enough people where the card room's going to bother opening a new game anytime soon. Like, for example, I would rather be 10th on the list than 5th on the list. So I decided to call it a night. I packed up my things and went home after playing less than 3 hours of cards during the evening, which might not have been the wisest decision. I definitely could have just played some 1-2 whilst I waited, so not the wisest decision, but it definitely was the laziest. I really don't want to give the wrong impression in this video. I did really enjoy One-Eyed Jacks. I think they have a great little card room there, great tables, great stuff with the very few interactions I had with them, but this was the last time that I ended up playing there. I mean, it's just really not a fair comparison at all, comparing this small business to the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that is the Hard Rock that owns Seminole Hard Rock in Tampa. Like, of course, they're going to have more games and bigger games running more often, particularly in Tampa, which is a more popular city than Sarasota as well. So whenever I did decide to play poker going forward, I would default to going to the Seminole Hard Rock Tampa, taking the hour-long trip both ways to grind those games instead. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and to see what happens when I did start grinding some crazy action at the Seminole Hard Rock Tampa in my next video. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.